welcome into the Women's Basketball Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things college basketball, WNBA, and oh so much more. I am Mia O'Brien, joined as I am each and every week by my co-host, Mitchell Northam, here on OG Triangle Media. Mitch, happy week 3. I guess we're into week 3 of college basketball season. It's crazy to think how many great games we've seen so far in just the first few weeks. Shout out to those Power 4 teams that aren't afraid to schedule each other.
Yeah, it's week 3, feast week approaches. I noticed in the AP Top 25 poll today, we had another, I think the top 12 were unchanged, but that's going to change because, yeah, these teams are going to start playing each other as we get to some of these neutral site and ACC, SEC challenge type things and all that fun stuff. They're going to have to face each other and someone's going to lose. And so there's going to be some shifts.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel as an AP voter, and especially this time of the year, it's so hard. I, of course, for those of you who are unfamiliar, I am a voter on the AP men's side. Mitch is on the women's AP Top 25 side. It's so hard this time of year because to determine, yes, you go through the KenPom, the Torvik rankings, all the metrics, but ultimately, I want to reward those teams that aren't afraid to go out and schedule fellow Power 4 opponents, or those mid-majors that are able to pull off an upset, especially if it's on the road on someone else's home floor.
Yeah, I always like to reward the teams that if you play people and if you win, I will reward you. If you are playing Sisters of the Poor and winning by 50 and 60, no knock against LSU, but like y'all do this every year with Kim Mulkey and like y'all don't play nobody until Thanksgiving. And so like I don't know how good you are until Thanksgiving. I like to reward the folks who schedule aggressively, win or lose.
Well, that makes me feel good because it's a perfect segue to where we begin each and every episode of the Women's Basketball Podcast with our Her of the Week nominees. Mitch, you may have seen on our sheet that we use our rundown that I did have a particular LSU player selected as my Her of the Week nominee. However, I am calling an audible. I said I wouldn't pick an Iowa Hawkeye for a Her of the Week, at least for a couple weeks. But I know you've been very vocal that Jan Jensen's squad needs more love, and Addison O'Grady needs more love. Folks, this is a player, and I know I talked about this last episode. This is a player that not only was the bane of my and so many Hawkeye fans' existence last year, but even in Wright Thompson's amazing long-form expose into Caitlin Clark's life. Caitlin Clark shares how many times she was yelling and screaming at Addison O'Grady for not finishing a play on the other end of the court. Was very open about this, as was Addie. That Addie was almost like her whipping post, for lack of a better term, or at least the scapegoat for so many on that Iowa team last year. Well, Addison O'Grady, after a performance that Mitch, you saw in person against Virginia Tech, in which she was perfect from the floor, she ended up 13 of 21, but she started at 7 of 7. Sunday afternoon at Drake. She finished with 27 points, 10 boards, her second career double-double. I am just in shock. The only person who made me more in shock is Caitlin Clark. There's a photo that Iowa posted because she was at the game because it was, of course, in her hometown of Des Moines. She looks like, oh, my God, I can't believe that Addison O'Grady has become this. So I will present Addison O'Grady as my Her of the Week nominee.
Yeah, I think I sent a tweet out this morning. Like, I just don't understand why Iowa isn't ranked yet. And like teams like Ole Miss are. Again, back to the thing of like, you ain't played nobody, or like in Ole Miss's case, you played USC, but you didn't win. And so like, what is your most impressive win? Delaware State. Iowa is out here beating Virginia Tech and like really good mid-majors in Toledo.
Yeah, Drake's going to be in the turn. I mean, Drake's the favorite to win the Valley again.
Yeah, and Toledo, a long time, like really good team in the MAC.
And they routed them by like 40.
They're playing good teams. And yeah, and then to the point of Addison O'Grady, like I think we talked about this after the Virginia Tech Iowa game, but like she looks like a different player. She has transformed herself into like not just a serviceable center, but like someone who can be like part of sort of a big three there, I think, alongside a Lucy Olsen and Hannah Stuelke. Like, if you can give us 25 and 10, against a team like Drake, again, like you said, who's going to be in the tournament, has been good for a while, like, that is a really good sign of things to come for Iowa. And I think people need to pay attention to this team, despite Caitlin Clark no longer being on the roster. Like, they deserve our attention. They're going to be a team that's around deep into March.
Right. So that's why, with all due respect to Flau'jae Johnson, who became the third ever LSU player with multiple 25, 5, and 5 games, do it against at least a team that's favored to win its conference, like Drake. Mitch, who is your Her of the Week nominee?
My Her of the Week nominee is Harmony Turner, who just continues to ball out and continues to look like the best player in the Ivy League. I think I've talked about Harvard a little bit here and there, going back to our test shows that no one heard besides me, you, and Dimitri. In any case, Harmony Turner, really off to a blistering start this season. Here's what she did last week. She scored 38 points against Maine, and then she scored 41 points and had 10 rebounds against Boston College. Before that, she had 24 points in Harvard's win at Indiana. We're not going to talk about what happened with Harvard against Quinnipiac. I'm not sure.
Are we going to talk about what happened with Indiana yesterday? We'll get to that in a little bit.
Yes, the Hoosiers did avenge themselves a little bit. But yeah, I think, Caitlin Shen has moved on to UConn. Abby Shue is no longer around at Columbia. I think Harmony Turner is the best player in the Ivy League, which for a few years now has been one of the best mid-major conferences in women's college basketball. And I think as long as she is playing like this, Harvard should be in line to win the Ivy and make the NCAA tournament. They're playing really good basketball, and she's playing at like an all-time level.
And we love to give love to those mid-majors, even if it's one of the higher mid-majors in the Ivy League. Let's head to our starting 5, Mitch. 3 for me this week, 2 for you, although I'm not going to lie, our first in our starting 5. You actually were the first person to alert me to this because we were in the midst of a Doug Peterson press conference last Wednesday, and you alerted me that Atlanta is going in a completely different direction than almost every other WNBA team in history when it comes to their next head coach. They made the decision to lure Carl Semesco out of Florida Gulf Coast, where, of course, he has won not 14 ASUN regular season, he has won 14 ASUN regular season titles, 13 conference titles, has been an absolute powerhouse in the mid-major ranks. And Atlanta pulls off a stunner as he will immediately become the head coach of the Atlanta Dream.
Yeah, I've been dying to talk about this. I think this is fascinating and just a big, bold swing by the Atlanta Dream. Carl Semesco is someone who literally built Florida Gulf Coast's program from the ground up. He had the power to do it his way. When he got hired, they didn't even have a gym. They weren't even in Division I. He was working out of a trailer in the parking lot. And over the years, as he's had all of this success, he's flirted with Power 4 jobs. He's talked to USC, to Indiana, to Illinois, to Oregon State. Last year, he talked to Miami for a little bit after Katie Meyer decided to retire. I think what maybe always pulled him back was this was his program and he built it this way. And so I think it's interesting that the only thing he's actually leaving for, is a job at a different level in the WNBA. And now I'm super interested to see so is he going to take his system and try to make it work in the WNBA, or is he going to completely reinvent himself and try to be whatever the WNBA wants him to be? I think it's going to be the former, but we're going to be able to tell pretty quickly, I think, with the moves that they're going to make in terms of roster construction with the expansion draft, who they protect and who they don't, and then off-season moves. I think if you look at this roster right now, and the style that Carl Semesco likes to play, there's a lot of players on this roster that don't make three-pointers with any sort of consistency. Is Naz Hillman going to be on this roster? Is Haley Jones going to be on this roster? Is Letitia Amahir going to be on this roster? Nia Coffey. I got to see the Eagles play last year down in Florida when I was working on my UNC book. I dug into them a little bit, and I dug up a couple of stats on Carl Semesco. So in each year since 2009, Florida Gulf Coast is ranked in the top 5 nationally in three-pointers attempted and made. And in 11 of those seasons, they have ranked in the top 35 nationally in offensive rating. In the same stretch, they've gone to 10 NCAA tournaments. They've advanced to the second round 4 times. Recent victims include Virginia Tech and Washington State. So it's like this system works. And I think at Florida Gulf Coast, when you're at a mid-major, you're kind of secluded. You have to figure out how to make yourself stand out, and you have to build a different mousetrap. So like, is he going to do that same sort of thing up at the Atlanta Dream in the WNBA, or is he going to have to adjust a little bit to maybe fit the pro style and what the pro game demands? And I'm just fascinated to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think that what's so interesting about the 3-point shooting prowess of Florida Gulf Coast is that on the men's side in the ASUN conference, that's what the University of North Florida has done since 2008 under Matthew Driscoll. They weren't even a Division I program at that time. And so very similar trajectories, except Semesco has had, with all due respect to Matthew Driscoll, he has had far and away more success, has made 10 NCAA tournaments compared to UNF's 1 during Driscoll's time as the head coach. And that offensive rating measurement that you brought up is so important because UNF touts themselves on the men's side that they shoot this many threes. They shoot the most threes of anybody in the country. They make them. That's great that you take that many threes, but what's the efficiency rating there?
Right. Does it work?
And that's where I am curious because I think, especially with, this new era of WNBA basketball with Caitlin Clark at the helm, and this idea of if she really is the generational figure we believe she is, and now this next generation coming up following Paige Beckers, Caitlin, Juju, they're all going to be shooting threes. Is that going to lend itself in the future players in the WNBA, if Carl Semesco is to be in Atlanta for the long haul, that he can say, you know what, we're just going to bring in women that want to shoot the 3 ball, and that's what we're going to predicate our offense on.
Yeah, and Florida Gulf Coast has been good on defense too. Like he's not just a 3-point guy.
And he's turned out WNBA prospects. Like Kirsten Bell, I understand was largely left on the side of the road by Ohio State, and because Carl has Ohio roots, he was able to pick her up and say, "Come on down to Fort Myers with me." But we do forget, like he's put women into the W too, so he knows what it takes.
Yes, 100%. Since 2009, Florida Gulf Coast averages 16.2 forced turnovers per game, which is in the top 13 nationally in every season since then. So like he knows how to play defense. He's a good coach, and that's why all those Power 5 programs have come after him over the years, and that's why the Atlanta Dream are making this move now.
Let's stay in the W for number 2 in this week's starting 5.
Yeah, so the Wings won the WNBA lottery, the draft lottery, and now I have a lot of questions. We all think that Paige Beckers is going to be the presumably number 1 pick, and I think that's going to be right unless she decides that she wants to come back to UConn for a 6th season, though she said that this is her last year, and so I'm going to hold her to that, and I think this is going to be her last year. But if you're the Wings, you have a lot of questions that you have to answer now, especially if you're Kurt Miller, who is the general manager of this team. Number 1, who are you going to hire as a head coach? And are you going to hire somebody?
Don't have a head coach. Let the record show.
Yeah. Are you going to hire somebody who like would be attractive to Paige Beckers in working with and that sort of thing? Are you going to take that into account? Number 2, because you have the number overall pick and you are presumably, we think, going to have the opportunity to draft a Paige Beckers who is, I think we all think, can be the cornerstone of a franchise and is going to be, a generational talent and be in the WNBA for a long time. Do you blow this roster up? And do you like Arike Ogunbowale is a great player, right? And I think that if the Dallas Wings decided to put her on the trading block, they could get a lot back for her. Mm-hmm. So do you think that Arike can play with Paige, or are you better off just blowing this roster up and sending Arike off and getting back whatever assets you can? Because frankly, since Arike has been there, I think everyone thought, okay, they can build around Arike. Mm-hmm. It hasn't really worked out. They've gone through a couple coaches. Arike has been great, top 5 in scoring, the whole thing. But I'm not sure she's like the nucleus superstar that you build a WNBA franchise around.
Which is crazy to think, because up until the probably last month of the season, she was, and certainly part of that was Nafisa Collier's rise to bringing her team, the Minnesota Lynx, to the WNBA finals. Arike was the number 2 betting odds favorite to win the MVP. Now, granted, that was with one Asia Wilson having like minus 6,000 odds to win MVP. But Arike was there almost from start to finish.
Yeah. And the other player, when everybody got up in arms about Caitlin Clark being snubbed from the Olympic team, the kind of second in line snub was Arike. We were like, why isn't Arike Gumbawale on this team?
Because
so
she didn't get enough practices with the pool, not enough
right.
with the pool.
Yeah. It's a very political organization.
You're not like swimming with them from like the time you're an infant. Like, it's a literal pool. You have to be swimming with them, Mitch. I'm just kidding.
Yes. But yeah, so it's now, I think, in addition to Carl Smesco's experiment in Atlanta, this is the second most interesting, I think, off-season thing to me right now is what do the Wings do in preparation for what we all think drafting Paige Beckers.
Yeah, I agree. And just looking at Spot Track and who they have under contract next year, certainly Arike's protected, Tierra McCowan, Kalani Brown. That's a big front court. That may be the biggest front court you'll find in the W. You got two wings and Maddie Segrist and JC Sheldon, who were both pretty high draft picks as well. And so you have some scoring capability there, even if it's not in necessarily the output of what you would get from Arike.
Yeah, and Arike is a player who, frankly, like needs the ball in her hands. But if you're drafting Paige Beckers, like you want to put the ball in her hands. So I'm very curious to see what the Wings think if, Kurt Miller, what he thinks really, if he thinks those two can coexist or if they're better off sending Arike to wherever. I don't know where she can end up.
Well, speaking of big names, we are now up to 34 of the 36 members of the Unrivaled Women's Basketball League having been announced, Mitch. Before today, the addition of two more. Alyssa Thomas and Steph Donaldson were the big names last week. Then Jordan Canada, Ray Burrell both joined the fray today. Before I get your take on the coaching announcement that also came down over the last few days since the last time we spoke, what do you make of those four names? And is this all building towards Caitlin Clark being the 36th name that they announced? Or a lot of conspiracy theories right now out there on the internet, on TikTok, are the last 6 additional spots because Caitlin Clark has already told Unrivaled, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to go keep playing in pro-ams around the country.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems to me, I kind of feel like if Caitlin was going to play, she would have already said so. And I think she wants to actually enjoy an off season. I think if she changes her mind, they'll make a spot for her, whether that's, roster spot 37 or whatever it is. Those names are great names to add. I'm excited to see. I think Alyssa Thomas is a player who can be really fun in 3-on-3 just because of how versatile she is and the sort
and
of
her lack of a labrum.
Right. That'll be fun to watch as well. So yeah, those are great additions. It's going to be a really fun league to watch, and like the construct they have in terms of like they're going to select the teams and then they'll assign the coaches. Like that's interesting. I like it that they're just trying different things and like trying new things that like we haven't really seen before with a sports league. Like be fun, be different. This is an experiment. Like let's see how year one goes. Let's have fun.
And we love that they have a TV deal as well. Steph Donaldson, of course, was a member of the USA 3x3 team at the 2021 Olympic Games. And so certainly that's a big name to add in the sport of 3x3. They also announced the 6 unrivaled coaches, among them Teresa Weatherspoon, the recently fired Chicago Sky head coach, who still doesn't have a job in the W. Are you surprised she resurfaces here on Unrivaled? Because I was not, and I just was like, man, the content, it continues to flow in women's basketball.
Yeah, I hope that Teaspoon gets another shot if she wants it in the W or in women's college basketball. Like, I think she's a good coach. I don't think she got a fair shake in Chicago. And I think a lot of the Chicago players would agree with me when I say that. It certainly seems like Angel Reese thought that when Teaspoon got fired. So yeah, I'm happy that we're going to see her on sidelines again. That'll be a great thing.
Let's head to the college game for number 4 in this week's starting 5, Mitch.
Yeah, TCU is legit. TCU is ranked in the AP Top 25 poll this week after a win over NC State at home, where they won 76-73. My big takeaway from the game is just, Mark Campbell looks like the Haley Van Lith whisperer. I think he has unlocked her. She has 19 assists in her last 2 games. her performance against NC State, she had 18 points and 10 assists. It was the first time in her career she had a double-double with assists. And to for her to kind of reach this different level now in her 5th season, I think is a credit to the kind of coach that Mark Campbell is. You also get 31 points and 16 rebounds from Sedona Prince in that game. TCU, number 19 in the AP poll this week, their highest ranking since 2008. I think we talked about it on maybe some test shows. Haley Van Lith kind of being a square peg in a round hole last year at LSU. It just never really felt right. It never really fit all the way. And I think Mark Campbell has sort of just released her and turned the keys of the offense over to her. And I think it's working, and I think it's going to continue to work for TCU. I think when you have a player like Haley Van Lith who can do a lot of different things and, run an offense and play make for herself and others, that's sort of what you have to do. You can't just put her in this box of hey, your job is to run pick and rolls with Angel Reese and Anissa Morrow, and then maybe go stand on the corner while Flau'jae Johnson tries to create her own shot. It just never really worked at LSU. I just don't think there was enough ball to go around between all those players. But at TCU, where she's the one running the offense, and then you have Sedona Prince down low, I think that is a winning formula. NC State, we'll talk about them another day. I don't really have much else to diagnose them with. They need to figure out what's going on at center, because when you play a player like Sedona Prince and you don't have a real true center, you get burned like that. But TCU, they're legit. Mark Campbell, good coach. Haley Van Lith, she's back.
I was one of those people who 1010% was on the internet pulling up clips of Kim Mulkey from when she played at Louisiana Tech, and the braids that she wore as the point guard, as a true pass-first point guard, and put them side by side, those photos, with Haley Van Lith and her long blonde braids at LSU last year, and couldn't help but come away and feel like, my goodness, Kim is just trying to make her a clone. And that is not who she is. She is not a pass-first point guard, and that is okay. She needs her offense to set the table for her to actually run the rest of the operation.
Yeah, and Haley, yesterday against NC State, she shot 8 of 24 from the floor. That's not great. That's not what exactly you want.
She's a Kobe disciple. She never met a shot she doesn't like.
Right, but she is kind of like a high-volume player like that, where, she needs to sort of dictate and control the tempo. And if you surround her with great players and then a star at center like Sedona Prince, when she was a sophomore, she helped Louisville go to the Final Four. I don't know if TCU is that good this year. That remains to be seen. But they're going to be a team that we talk about deep into March for sure.
It would be an incredible story when you consider how their season ended last year, in which, let's be real, they didn't have enough healthy players. And so
right.
That's what I think would be most incredible if TCU was to turn it around and turn it into a long, lengthy run in March. Let's end this week's starting 5 with a little bit of news on the recruiting front. I promised I wouldn't have too much Iowa, but I do. Addie Greenway, the daughter of course, Chad Greenway, the longtime Iowa Hawkeye. Yes, it is Addie, right? I am giving the right name. I'm looking it up to pull it up, make sure that's her first name. Chad Greenway's daughter, very good basketball player in Minnesota, has announced she's committed to the University of Kentucky. She is not going to Iowa. There's a lot of reports out there on the Iowa message boards that this is because there's too many guards. And I think I actually may be confusing her name now with Addie Deal, who is coming from Mater Dei High School in California. She's going to be in the class of 2026 at Iowa. And so anyways, point being, Iowa just lost to Greenway to Big Blue Nation. Part of it is a credit to Kenny Brooks. In the write-up that she gave, she noted that she loves what Kenny's doing at Kentucky in his first season and his ability to develop guards. And as soon as she got on campus, she felt like she belonged and this was home. But yeah, I don't want to call it a recruiting miss for Iowa. It should have been a slam dunk, though, when you consider they've essentially been recruiting her since she was born. But also at the same time, you have Addie Deal coming in, who's a top 15 player in the class of 2026. She is going to be a ball, she's going to have the ball in her hands. She is going to be the one running the show. And so I understand it's a numbers game, but yeah, it would have been nice for Iowa to load up even more.
Yeah, Maddie Greenway.
So it's Maddie, but she didn't want to compete with Addie. That's what it is.
Right. Yeah. I'm just doing some Googling now, and she seems like a good successor as any to Georgia Amor. Hearing the name Chad Greenway just makes me very old, because that makes me think about like Madden 09 when he was a linebacker for the Minnesota Vikings, and like, I could go pick him up and, franchise mode, trade for him pretty easily. Chad Greenway, shout out to him. Shout out to making me feel old. Sure, Maddie Greenway. Let's see it. Let's see her play for Big Blue Nation, which got a huge win yesterday over Louisville. Not yesterday, Saturday, with a breakout game from Tiani Key. So Kenny Brooks on a roll on the court and off the court there in Kentucky.
As we're recording this right now, they're down 31-29 to Purdue Fort Wayne. Stop the count, Mitch. I'm just kidding. Speaking of those games from the week that was, let's run through a couple of them, beginning with one that you were at last Friday. UConn 69, nice. North Carolina 58. This is obviously a Heels team that you've been embedded with, so you know more than anyone probably in the country. This is also a UConn team that it's still without some of its marquee names, i.e. AZ Fudd, still out with injury. What did we learn about the Huskies? What did we learn about the Heels?
Yeah, my big takeaway from the game was that it was a moment where Paige Beckers reminded us all that she's one of, if not the best player in the country. She finishes with 29 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, and 0 turnovers in 37 minutes. She hit a buzzer beater at the end of the first quarter. She was just in complete control of the game from start to finish, and there was really nothing North Carolina could do about it. After the game, Gino said something to the effect of, the only way you can stop her is if you foul her on every play, which in this game, that was true. There was nothing North Carolina could do to stop her. She just had her fingerprints all over the game. She was using Sarah Strong as like a moving human shield, is what I called her in the story I wrote at USA Today's For the Win about the game. Using her to kind of pick and pop around her to drain 3-pointers. And then she's throwing like cross-court passes to Caitlin Chen for wide-open 3-pointers. It's a really good UConn team. And, I think Paige should be the front runner. I know we talk a lot about Juju Watkins and Hannah Hidalgo and some of these other players, and they're all really great. But I think right now, and I think she is, if you look at some of the sports books, she should be the favorite to win the National Player of the Year award, Paige Beckers. I think that a lot of times, we forget, when Paige was a freshman, she won National Player of the Year, consensus across the board. She won all the major awards, took UConn to the Final Four, the whole thing. And then her sophomore year, she gets hurt and comes back.
Her junior year, she gets hurt.
Yeah, her sophomore year, she misses half of the season. They lose to South Carolina in the national championship game. She misses all of her junior year with that knee injury. And then, while she's out, we have these other sports in the, stars in the sport rising. Caitlin Clark rises up. Angel Reese rises up. All these big names. Paige comes back last year. She's still really, really good. She's a first-team All-American. But I think certainly in terms of the spotlight, she was behind Caitlin and Angel and Juju and even Hannah Hidalgo, to a degree. I think this is the year where Paige grabs the spotlight back on her way to becoming the number 1 pick. She was just far and away the most impressive player on the court. Sarah Strong, I think, is going to get better with every game. She is somebody that North Carolina recruited very, very, very hard last year. Sarah Strong was at practices and at games, and she was around the Star Heels team a lot last year, and narrowly chose UConn over them. And she finishes with 14, 13, and 6 assists. I've heard high school coaches compare her to Nikola Jokic. I've heard people compare her to Magic Johnson. She can do a little bit of everything. She's a really fun player to watch.
Tall?
No, she's about 6'2", 6'3".
Okay, I mean, it's bigger. It's a bigger point guard, but
yeah, I think in terms of
Clark is actually 6 flat or 6. I think they may list her at 6 foot 6'1", which surprises people. When you're standing next to her, she's definitely taller than you think she is. Maybe not 6'2" tall, but
yeah. I think the point of those people is she's big enough to play really, really well in the post, but she also might be the best passer on the court. and a really good 3-point shooter. And so she can do all these things. So yeah, that was my takeaway from UConn. They're probably going to be in the Final Four, and then we'll see what happens from there. North Carolina, to borrow a phrase from our friend Joe Giglio at the OG, I don't know who the bus driver is for this team right now. I don't know who like the lead dog is. I don't know who the top playmaker is going to be. I know that Alyssa Usby is the most veteran player and probably, you know, the best player per se, but she's not the person that you can turn to go get 20 and 10 against UConn. And frankly, her and Lexi Donarski and Maria Gokdang didn't really show up in this game. And Courtney Banghart said as much in her post-game press conference. It's like one of the first time I've ever heard Courtney call out her players in a post-game press conference. She just said flat out, like, we need more from our seniors. And they do. And I kind of wonder if we get to a point where they're not getting more from their seniors. They have, you know, three fifth-year players on this team, and then a true senior in Maria Gokdang. And the other fifth-year player is Grace Townsend. And they just didn't get enough from those veteran players in this game. And when you play a team like UConn, you need everybody at their best. So I sort of wonder as we go along in this season if they just sort of turn the page and kind of embrace the youth movement. Because when the Tar Heels were at their best against UConn was early in the fourth quarter, they break off a 10-3 run to start the fourth quarter. And on the court is India Navarre and then Treyana Crisp, so, you know, two juniors, and then a bunch of young players, a bunch of freshmen, and Lainey Grant, who's 17 years old, and Sierra Toomey and Layla Hall, who are redshirt freshmen. And I think Sierra Toomey gets better with every game, but I kind of wonder with this UNC team, like, are they better off playing the younger players if they're not getting what they need out of the vets?
Let's head to our next game of the week that we wanted to spotlight, Mitch, before I ask you a question as we look back at the week that was. Bluegrass State Showdown. It was a goodie between Kentucky and Louisville on Saturday. Big Blue Nation reigns supreme in that big Bluegrass State. 71-61, the final in favor of the Cats over the Cardinals. What do you make of that one? And is Kenny Brooks really just going to make Kentucky the team to beat in the SEC, not named not Dawn Staley, South Carolina, but in the state of Kentucky? He's just going to make them the top dog just like that, just less than a month on into the first season of his tenure.
My bold prediction off of this game is that Kentucky's going to finish in the top 4 in the SEC. I think South Carolina is better than them. I think Texas is probably better than them.
Do we really count Texas in the SEC? Sorry. Still not used to it. It's all good. Continue.
I know it's still weird. I had to remind myself the other day that Oklahoma's in the SEC. But yeah, LSU, Oklahoma, but I think Kentucky is right there. I think this is a really good team. I think Kenny Brooks is getting the most out of all these players that he brought in via the transfer portal. He gets another like career best performance from Tiani Key, who is finally healthy and is finally like living up to her potential as a top rated recruit when she first came to North Carolina. And then she battled injuries really like over the past 2.5 years. She has 17 points in that game. Amelia Hassett, 13 rebounds. You get 14 points from Deaza Lawrence, 12 points and 9 rebounds from Clara Strack. And then you have this veteran at point guard in Georgia Amore who just gets to kind of control the game and pick her spots. And, 19 points, 9 assists. I think Georgia is getting better as a passer, and I didn't think there was anything Georgia could like get better at when she left Virginia Tech last year. She's a really fun player to watch. But yeah, I think Kentucky has things clicking and has things moving, and I think they're only going to get better. And this was a really good like early test for them against a Louisville team that's good, but is really young and is still really building. So to kind of pull away in overtime from them, outscoring them 13-3 in overtime, that's a really good win for Kentucky early on in the season. They have some other like marquee matchups coming up. They're going to play Illinois on a neutral court on November 27th. And then they're going to play at North Carolina, Kenny Brooks going back in ACC country and going back to a gym in Carmichael Arena that he's frankly dominated in the past couple of years when he was at Virginia Tech. So those are two early tests again for Kentucky as they sort of march through the rest of non-con and get into SEC play.
And of course, it's a young Louisville team, like you alluded to. So the fact that they brought this game to OT, I think that says a lot about the Cardinals. Yeah. Biggest test for them in the remaining next few weeks of the non-conference portion of their schedule. They will obviously play UConn. They also will play Oklahoma. And I think Colorado, while it's not the same Colorado from the NCAA tournament, you may remember each of the last 2 years, would think that having to travel out there would still certainly be a challenge for this young Cardinal team.
Yeah, and they're also going to play South Florida. I think South Florida is a little bit better than their record says right now. They got smacked around by UConn too, and then lost a tough one at home to Vanderbilt. But yeah, Louisville, I think I think Jeff Walls built this schedule in a way that is going to kind of put them in the fire early to kind of make him realize who the freshmen are that are going to step up and which veterans he can kind of mesh them with as they get into ACC play. And they're going to open ACC play pretty early. December 15th, they host NC State on ABC. So that's going to be one to watch. That'll be interesting to see kind of how they come off those matchups with Oklahoma and UConn.
This is what we get for 18-team conferences. You have to start conference play. The Big Ten's been doing this for years now, folks, because when you expand the conference, you have no choice. You got to start those games in conference a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Courtney Banghart, I think, said that originally their game with UConn was supposed to be on December 15th. But then when the ACC decided to add 3 teams and the schedule had to start a little bit earlier for conference play, they had to move the game to November. But Greensboro was better for it. 10,000 some fans out there. It was a packed building, really fun atmosphere for a Friday night. And as I alluded to on last week's episode, we got the announcement. Tennessee and NC State are going to be in Greensboro next season, which is going to be really fun to watch too.
Give us more Power 4 conference games in the non-con. We love it. Before I ask you who your surprise team so far is of the first 2-3 weeks of the season, Mitch, are there any other games you want to hit? Although I think the game you may want to hit may actually be my surprise team, but let's hear if there's any more from you.
I was surprised that Indiana upset Stanford, frankly.
Yep, I thought that's where you were going to go. That is my Jekyll and Hyde surprise team of 2024 so far.
Yeah, I just, I thought, when they lost to Harvard at home, I was like, okay, well, maybe this Indiana team, maybe they don't have quite the goods this year. Maybe it's going to take them some time. Then they beat Stanford by double digits. So, I was pretty surprised to see that. I thought that, that's a great win for them early on. I was impressed that Duke went out to South Dakota State and got a win. Just because South Dakota State, they're one of these mid-major teams that we talk about where over time, they have an established track record of beating power conference teams, of making the NCAA tournament and winning games in it. I mean, it was a couple of years ago I saw them beat USC up in Blacksburg. South Dakota State's a good team. And I think for a young Duke team like this to go in there and win 75-71, that was a good sign for them. I think Duke is going to be a team that we talk about in contention for the ACC this year. Excuse me. The SEC hasn't quite stolen them away from us yet. Lots of surprises so far.
Once it's the Super League, then we'll have that conversation.
For sure, yeah.
But no, I was going to say Indiana just because of the Jekyll and Hyde roller coaster nature of this schedule so far. 82-60 winners over Brown. Then you lose 2 straight to the likes of Harvard, who we did allude to are her of the week. Does come from that Ivy League, so it's not the worst thing in the world, although it did come at Assembly Hall, that 72-68 loss. Then they go on the road. They lose to Butler. You're Indiana. You never want to lose to Butler, especially by 10 points. And then they pull this upset. And so what a weird 2 weeks that it has been for Indiana. The only thing weirder, Sydney Parrish had just 7 points in that 79-66 win. Now, probably not a surprise to see Chloe Moore McNeil go off for 21. But yeah, it's a fascinating situation there. And I know we talked about it. No Mackenzie Holmes, the idea of not having a true center with her back to the basket and how that would affect how this offense is run. but I just truly felt like the wing depth would be enough to power them both offensively and defensively.
Yeah, I think Indiana is a team that, like, when they're at their best, well, that's what we saw against Stanford, right? At their worst, I think is what we saw against Butler, and they're probably realistically somewhere in between, and they just have to kind of figure out, who the players are that they get that consistency from. It's a new era of Indiana basketball without Mackenzie Holmes there, but I think they're figuring it out, and they'll be a March Madness team for sure.
All right, without further ado, let's look ahead to next week, Mitch. Now, we call it Chef's Table. It's setting the table. We've got an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert. We're also workshopping, calling this Making Money with Mitch, because we don't have a lot of women's basketball lines this time of the year, but Mitch has your guaranteed winners here on the Women's Basketball Podcast. Mitch, take it away.
Yes, I try to do my best here. So Thursday is a game that I might actually go to. We'll see what my schedule looks like. But Duke, who I just talked about, is hosting Belmont, who is going to be one of those mid-major teams that, like, we talk about. I think when we get to March, like, they're going to be a team where we're like, okay, nobody wants to see Belmont in the first round. They just gave Ohio State a scare. They lost 67-63. In Columbus, gave them a pretty good fight there. Actually, excuse me, that game was in Nashville, so kudos to the Buckeyes for playing that one on the road. But anyways, I think Belmont is a good team. So that is 7:00 on Thursday night on ACC Network. I think that's a game that's worth tuning into. It's another, Duke is kind of playing a lot of these really tough mid-major teams early in their schedule. I think Kara Lawson likes, formatting her schedule this way, where she plays a little bit on the road, a little bit at home, but really doesn't play like any pushover cupcake type teams. Belmont is a team that's probably going to be in the NCAA tournament. So I think that is going to be a matchup to watch. If that spread is like double digits, I would maybe pick Belmont to cover. I don't expect Duke to blow them out, but that'll be something to watch.
Any player props, any players to watch for in that one?
I don't have any props for you, but keep your eye on Toby Fournier, who continues to impress for Duke off the bench. I think she's averaging, like double digits in scoring so far this season. I feel like every time I look at a Duke box score, she has 15 and 5. So she's really providing a boost to them early on. Jaden Donovan up at South Dakota State for Duke had 23 points and 15 rebounds. She's a player to watch. So really fun Duke team, also a really fun Belmont team. Belmont has her name is escaping me. Nope, she transferred to Clemson. Oh, Kendall Holmes.
I was going to say that's going to happen a lot this year. It's okay. No, she transferred to. Yep. No, wait.
All of them. Kendall Holmes played well against Ohio State. She had 19 points. So check her out. But yeah, two really good teams going at it in Cameron Indoor Stadium on Thursday night.
I hope you guys are ready for the entree, because it is a hefty meal. And make sure you save some room for dessert, because man, oh man, do we have some elite matchups this weekend.
Yeah, so this is what I was talking about, where like we're finally going to get some movement in the top 12 of the AP poll.
And it's not even Thanksgiving yet.
Yeah, because some of these teams gotta catch some L's. So yeah, Saturday, 4:00 Eastern on NBC or Peacock if you have the streaming. Number 6 Notre Dame at number 3 USC. This is, a big rivalry on the football field.
I was going to say way better than the football matchup, by the way.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be, sort of a rivalry renewed on the basketball court, because these are two teams who expect to make the Final Four this year. Notre Dame is playing like a very tight rotation right now because, as per usual, Notre Dame is dealing with injuries. And they haven't really played anybody, so far in their non-conference slate. So I don't know how good Notre Dame actually is. I think the best team they've probably played. Sorry, Purdue, you're probably not the best of these 4 teams. I think it's James Madison, and they beat James Madison 92-46. They beat Purdue 102-58. I don't know how good Notre Dame is, but I know that on paper they have probably the best backcourt in the country when you talk about Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo, and then you throw Sonia Citron in there. it's just a matter of, I don't know who's going to be healthy for Notre Dame in this game. I think Liatu King has missed some time. Maddie Westbeld is still out. So interested to see kind of how at full strength the Irish are, and then how USC responds to that. Since their game against Ole Miss, USC hasn't really played any tough games. They beat Cal State Northridge, by the way, 124-39, which is like a murder.
Yeah.
Like at some point,
we had a similar score in Jacksonville between North Florida and Trinity Baptist, so maybe that's why it wasn't that eye-popping to me when I saw this. But yeah.
We need like a slaughter rule or something, turn the clock off, skip the fourth quarter. Anyways, this is going to be a really good must-watch matchup, and will influence some shifting in the AP Top 25 poll for sure.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you for a player prop, but tell me, in that ball game, who is the leading scorer between both teams?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'll give you Hannah Hidalgo. I think she's on a good tear right now. I think like seeing her score like 28, I think might be the leading scorer of the day. But USC certainly has people on their side who can fill it up too, Juju and Kiki and the whole gang there. So, but I'll take Hannah Hidalgo.
All right, I like Juju just because I think again we're still seeing a backcourt in Notre Dame that again banged up, but I think that they're going to have to share the ball a little bit more than perhaps Juju has had to with USC. All right, I told you guys to save some room for dessert because we got another elite matchup on Sunday.
Yeah, 4:00 on Sunday. FS1, number 1 South Carolina at number 5 UCLA. This is, I think, a super intriguing matchup just because, as we've talked about with South Carolina this season, it hasn't really mattered yet. But they don't have, as we've talked about before, that dominant center that they have had in years past. They do not have a Camila Cardozo and Aaliyah Boston and Asia Wilson. They do have Ashlyn Watkins back in the mix. I don't know how effective she by herself will be against a player like Lauren Betts, who is playing, frankly, some of her best basketball right now and is, frankly, a giant at 6'7" when you talk about women's college basketball. Lauren Betts this year, 21.5 points per game, 11.5 rebounds per game, really controlling every game she's been in for UCLA. And like we talked about earlier this season, kind of the question that we had for UCLA was like, can Lauren Betts step up and be the best player? So far, she's been that. They have played and beaten Louisville and Arkansas. She had 31 points in a win over Colgate. Again, not top competition there, but nonetheless showing that she can do it, that she can carry the team.
They did a number on Arkansas too. I mean, 101-52.
Oh, yeah.
Like they hung 101 on Arkansas. That's an SEC team. I mean, I understand it's not what Arkansas maybe was once upon a time, but still.
Yeah. And what we did see in that game was the return of Kiki Rice. She played 11 minutes. So that's a good sign for UCLA going into this game. Lauren Betts has kind of carried things without her, but and Janiah Barker has stepped up too. She had 17 points against Arkansas and has played well early on here for the Bruins. So with home court advantage, and I don't say this a lot about a lot of South Carolina opponents.
Uh-oh. Are you going to pick UCLA?
I don't think so. I think I'm going to pick South Carolina to win, but I think that it's going to be a close one and it's going to be must watch because like it's one of the few games where like South Carolina does not have the size advantage. And again, like that's not something we say a whole lot, but it's an intriguing matchup for sure.
So you got the Bruins will cover the spread, but you're still sticking with South Carolina money line.
If UCLA is a road dog or a home dog, I would definitely pick UCLA to cover like 5 points.
Corey Close thanks you for your service and sacrifice, and as we make money with Mitch each and every week here on the Women's Basketball Podcast. So to recap, for our appetizer, Belmont at Duke on Saturday, Notre Dame at USC. That is the full entree, folks. And then for dessert, South Carolina at UCLA Sunday on FS1. Last call now, Mitch. Shout-outs, closeouts. What did we miss today?
I just want to give a shout-out to Tim Taylor at Navy. They are 5-0, which is awesome. They've had a lot of struggles and ups and downs, since he took that job, and he's got a good team, it seems like, this year, and it's awesome to see them winning some games. The other team, like, earlier we talked about kind of surprises and stuff. I am sort of surprised that Maryland is playing this well this early in the season.
I almost made them my surprise team.
With all the newcomers that they have, you talk about 10, 11 new players on the roster. They're 5-0. They went up and won at Syracuse, beat Duke. They have, some games kind of coming up on their schedule that are going to be, I think, opportunities for them to build some chemistry. They're not exactly playing world beaters before Big Ten play starts. But I'm circling, there's 2 back-to-back games in early January. They play at Iowa and then they host USC. I think that's when we're going to see like what Maryland is really made of. And then my other just shout out and sort of surprise is like Richmond is looking like they might be one of those mid-major powers this year. They're 4-0. They beat Fairfield, who I've talked about on the show, is a really good team. Richmond is going to host Texas in December, which is interesting. And I might drive up I-85 and maybe go check that out.
Yeah, that'll be another interesting one that, hey, we give a shout out to those Power 4, Power 5 teams that are willing to travel to the mid-majors. Like we said, Ohio State went to Belmont, but I think that was mostly just because they wanted to go hang out on Broadway and enjoy Nashville. A couple shout outs for me in the Sunshine State. Do want to shout out Special Jennings and the JU Women's Dolphins team. They had a doubleheader down in South Florida. They not only picked up their first, I guess it would be not their first win of the year, but they beat FIU. I think that's like their first big win of significance, I would say, during the non-conference portion of their schedule. But what got buried in that lead of, hey, they picked up this great big-time double-digit win over an FIU team was that they only lost to Miami by 3. And that, for me, is a massive indicator of where this team is headed in calling a couple of their games. The feedback I've heard from players is, look, it's definitely a much more detail-oriented, discipline, not militaristic, but certainly every minute of every day is accounted for style under Special Jennings. But I mean, if you're hanging within 3 of Miami, which is my other shout out, is to the Canes, who went on the road and beat Florida in their annual matchup over the weekend. I mean, look, like, I don't want to say that JU's closing the door on Florida here, because that would be speaking a little bit too much into existence, but hey, manifest. Point being, I think that maybe JU's a little bit further ahead of schedule than many thought it. And of course, with no Carl Semesco in the A-Sun now, as he's off to the Atlanta Dream, very curious to see. I don't think Florida Gulf Coast is going to be dethroned anytime soon, but I'm very fascinated to see the pecking order in the rest of that conference, especially knowing, as we talked about on the program a few weeks ago, Mitch, how many of these teams in that conference have gone out and they've brought in either former players of Carl's or former coaches of Carl's as consultants, just to have some idea of what the Eagles are doing down there in Fort Myers.
Yeah, Miami is a team that I voted in my AP Top 25 poll this week after they went and won at Florida, and got an all-time performance from Haley Cavender, 31 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. She's back. And if you want to read more about her, I wrote about her at For the Win and why she decided to come back to women's college basketball. FIU, is their basketball arena also named after Pitbull or no?
I don't know. That's a good question. I hope it is. And if not, maybe it's named after, like, I don't know, like, give me somebody else. Ricky Martin. Like, I'm trying to think of like some other, like, Rob Thomas. Like, who's another like cult hero when it comes to music? Besides, I mean, I don't want to put Pitbull in that box with Rob Thomas, but like when I think of music and like iconic figures, that's wherever my brain goes. But yeah, I wanted to shout out Miami as well. Wanted to shout out my good friend Noah Thomas, who is their athletic communication video specialist extraordinaire. The graphic that they edited where they made it a 40 burger or 44 burger, whatever it was, or 50 burger between the 2 Cavender sisters, and they made the graphic, and it's the McDonald's. Epic. Loved it. Love it. Lean into the Cavender twins. We only have them for 1 more year. And
oh yeah, I didn't realize the game that Hannah had too. They did, yeah. So they combined for 43 points, 12 rebounds,
burger,
and 10 assists. That's pretty good. That's what you want if you're Trisha Cullop.
Yeah, and it's what you needed, quite frankly. I mean, look, ultimately when Katie retired, like, you were always going to have players transfer out of that program. The fact that Jazz stuck around, I mean, for those who, if I haven't mentioned it on a podcast before, I covered Jasmine Roberts her entire high school career, very privileged to call her a friend of mine. And look, like Jazz was all in. She was all in on what this new staff came in and sold. But at the same time, after seeing the struggles for her when not just because she was the lead dog, so to speak, last year in her junior year, but knowing how much help she had her sophomore season, and certainly that was a senior laden team, even beyond the Cavenders, she was always going to need a couple extra pieces to help carry the load this year, just by virtue of going up against the schedule that they do have playing in the ACC. And so, yeah, massive, perhaps most underrated reintroduction, a signing that no one's talking about, but yet everyone's talking about, the Cavender twins back in college basketball.
Yeah, and I'm a huge Jasmine Roberts fan. I covered Miami's Elite Eight run as a freelancer for the Miami Herald that year. And she, her and Destiny Harden, that team was so fun to watch. And she really carried them in some of those NCAA tournament games. 26 points against Villanova, and that win over Maddie Siegrist in Greenville. Really fun team and really fun player. So, Miami is definitely a team that I'm keeping an eye on in the ACC this season.
Shout out to Jazzy Jazz. Shout out to the Cavender twins. Anyone we missed, Mitch? Last call.
I think we're good. Shout out to Pitbull.
Shout out to Pitbull. Shout out to Ricky Martin. Shout out to Rob Thomas. That does it for this week's episode of the Women's Basketball Podcast. We will be back same time, same place next week, Knuckleheads. We will catch you then.
Deuces.